So this YouTuber was just arrested for illegally exploring North Sentinel Island, which has a long history of encounters that have gone horribly wrong. Despite strict laws meant to protect the tribe's isolation, outsiders continue to push the boundaries, often with deadly results. These are real cases of people who visited North Sentinel Island. So news of this just came out the other day. Just earlier this month, a man named Viktorovich Polyakov, a tourist from the US, made the very bad decision to illegally visit North Sentinel Island. He was fascinated by the idea of the last uncontacted tribe on Earth and decided to try his luck at making contact. Ignoring the strict Indian laws that keep outsiders away, Polyakov filmed his whole trip, even leaving gifts for the Sentinelese. These laws exist for a reason. The tribe has a history of attacking anyone who gets too close to protect their way of life, and there's always the chance that you could bring something over there, diseases that they're not immune to. Well, Polyakov tried to approach quietly, hoping to get a glimpse of the tribe. As soon as the Sentinelese saw him, they weren't having it. They shot arrows in his direction, and he quickly realized that maybe this wasn't such a great idea after all. Well, after spending hours on the island, he was eventually caught by local authorities when he tried to leave. He's very lucky he got out of there alive, though. Many others haven't been as fortunate. In 2006, a group of fishermen illegally ventured too close to North Sentinel Island. The fishermen were from a nearby island and had been fishing in the area when their boat drifted too close to the shore. The islanders weren't welcoming. The men were fired at with arrows, and tragically, all 3 fishermen were killed. The Indian government, which had been trying to respect the tribe's isolation for years, had to step in. They sent a rescue team to retrieve the bodies, but even the recovery effort was a tense and dangerous operation. The team had to stay far from the island to avoid angering the tribe even more. There was a lot of controversy surrounding this case. Some argued that the fishermen's deaths could have been avoided if the law banning contact with the island had been better enforced. For the Sentinelese, this was just another reminder of how fiercely they protect their land and how little they want from the outside world. It also made the Indian government realize they'd have to do even more to keep the island isolated and avoid any more conflicts. This wouldn't be the last time someone made contact though, but let's go further back in time first, way further. In 1771, the first recorded mention of North Sentinel Island came from the crew of the Diligent, an East India Company hydrographic survey vessel. They spotted what they described as a multitude of lights flickering along the shores of the island. They didn't investigate further, but this brief glimpse was the beginning of recorded awareness of the island. In 1867, things started to get a little more intense. During a monsoon season, the Nineveh, an Indian merchant vessel, ran aground on the reef near North Sentinel. The crew and passengers managed to make it to the beach, but on the 3rd day, they were attacked by a group of armed Sentinelese. The islanders, painted in red and armed with arrows, ambushed them, forcing the survivors to fight back with sticks and stones. A Royal Navy rescue team eventually arrived, but by the time they did, the attackers had dispersed. The survivors were left shaken, but at least they were alive. A few months later, Jeremiah Humphrey, a colonial officer, became one of the first to officially document the Sentinelese. He observed the islanders hunting with bows and arrows. Then, in 1880, the British colonial administrator Maurice Vidal Portman took things a step further, actually many steps further, attempting to establish contact. He led an armed expedition capturing 6 Sentinelese people, including an elderly man, a woman, and 4 children. Sadly, the man and woman died from diseases they had no immunity against. The children were returned, but the attempt to form peaceful relations obviously didn't go smoothly. Usually kidnapping isn't the best way to start a healthy dialogue. Portman made several more visits over the years, but nothing really changed, mainly because this guy was a major weirdo. I can't really even talk about some of the things he did, but these encounters only reinforced the tribe's desire to be left the hell alone. In 1967, an Indian anthropologist named Triloknath Pandit led the first official professional expedition to North Sentinel Island. Pandit, hoping to study their way of life, was one of the few to venture close to the island after decades of failed and violent attempts by outsiders to make contact. Pandit didn't actually step foot on the island though. Instead, he and his team stayed at a safe distance, watching the Sentinelese from the shore. But they did end up making a bit of contact. The Sentinelese came up, they were able to exchange some gifts. They saw a few people standing on the beach, but no one was trying to make friends or wave hello necessarily. It wasn't exactly an action-packed trip, but Pandit's trip did show that maybe you could observe the tribe without completely pissing them off. His expedition started a new wave of more respectful and cautious approaches to the island though, with people realizing that the tribe just wanted to be left alone. Leopold III of Belgium. So this one's a bit of an interesting and unexpected chapter. In 1975, Leopold III, the former king of Belgium, found himself cruising around the Andaman Islands on a private trip. He decided to observe them from the safety of his ship just off the coast. Now, it's important to note this was not some hands-on attempt like some of the ones before. Leopold just wanted to watch from afar, without directly interacting with the islanders. The encounter was basically just him and his crew hanging out on the boat, watching the tribe go about their business. The tribe still fired arrows at the ship though. Now, it wasn't a full-on attack, they were just sending a message. But it was a clear sign that the tribe wanted absolutely no interaction. Oddest thing about this case though is that Leopold would later describe the experience as, quote, delightful. In 1977, the crew of the cargo ship MV Rooslee had an encounter with the Sentinelese. The Rooslee ran aground near North Sentinel Island during a storm. The Sentinelese showed up to inspect the wreckage. The islanders, who were no strangers to scavenging and using what they found, got a little too interested in the ship's iron supplies. They arrived on makeshift boats, armed with bows and arrows. The crew had been warned about the dangers of interacting with the tribe, so they kept their distance. But the Sentinelese weren't about to just ignore the wrecked ship. They started to scavenge, focusing on the metal parts of the ship, which they probably found useful for their tools or weapons. At first, the crew and the Sentinelese just kind of watched each other. The crew, realizing the tribe was interested in the ship's cargo, probably stayed back, hoping not to provoke any aggression. But the Sentinelese weren't content to just observe. They fired arrows at the crew. According to some reports, the crew returned fire with flares, but it wasn't a full-on battle, it was more of a standoff. Thankfully, in the end, the crew of the ship managed to be rescued. In 1981, the MV Primrose, a cargo ship, ran aground near North Sentinel Island, much like the MV Rooslee years earlier. The ship was stranded on the reef, and the crew found themselves in a bit of a tricky situation. As they sat there waiting for help, the Sentinelese showed up. The crew reported seeing the islanders watching them from a distance, probably curious about the ship and its cargo. The Sentinelese, as always, were wary of strangers, and it didn't take long for tensions to rise. At one point, a small group of islanders made their way closer to the ship, wielding their bows and arrows. The crew responded cautiously, and there was no reported confrontation. Fortunately, a rescue operation had been sent out, and the crew was taken to safety before things escalated. Next up is Madhumala Chattopadhyay. This one's pretty cool because she became a bit of a legend for being the first woman to make peaceful contact with the Sentinelese. In 1991, she was part of a team from the Indian government that was sent to the island. The goal was to figure out a way to interact with the Sentinelese in a less confrontational way. Given that earlier attempts had resulted in violence or at best confusion, she went in with a mix of caution and respect, not trying to force anything, just trying to show the tribe that not all outsiders meant harm to them. When they landed, the team was cautious and kept their distance, but after some time, Madhumala and the Sentinelese kind of found a middle ground. She was able to give them some gifts, things like coconuts and other simple items, and in return, the islanders kind of responded in a similar way. It wasn't like they were best friends after that, but it was a major step in understanding that with the right approach, there might be a way to communicate without violence. What's crazy is that despite the success of this interaction, the Indian government basically called for even more caution after that. They understood that any further interaction could easily backfire. So the whole thing kind of became this very leave them be message. In 1991, the Indian government sent a team of researchers to make contact with the Sentinelese. The team, led by Trilokanth Pandit once again, had a simple goal: peaceful interaction. They weren't looking for a full-blown exchange, but just some way to connect with the tribe without scaring them off. They even brought along a helicopter to keep a safe distance while observing from the air. So the team dropped some gifts, coconuts, fish, and such on the beach, hoping the Sentinelese would take the bait. As expected, the islanders shot arrows into the air, sending a very clear message. There was no face-to-face contact this time, but the team did get a better understanding of the Sentinelese's strong desire to be left alone. Despite their good intentions, though, the expedition just proved the point that the tribe was not interested in outsiders. And all of this leads up to our final case, the most infamous one we've talked about here before, but it is very appropriate for this video, the case of John Allen Chau. In 2018, Chau, an American missionary, illegally traveled to North Sentinel Island in an attempt to convert the Sentinelese to Christianity. Now, despite knowing that the tribe was highly protective of their land, he made his way there with the hope of preaching to them. Chau had already been warned multiple times by authorities and the fishermen he was on the boat with that the islanders were dangerous and that getting too close could be fatal, but he went anyway, hiring local fishermen to take him to the island. And on his first attempt to contact the tribe, he was fired at with arrows and he was forced to retreat. But he returned the next day, determined to try again. This time, Chau got closer and closer, and the arrows ended up being fatal. The fishermen who had helped him reached out to authorities, and a rescue mission was launched, but by the time they got there, it was too late. There was a lot of debate surrounding his death. Some described him as a martyr. I wonder who they were. But more level-headed folks saw this for what it was. Just really not a good idea. Well, with all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.